What's up, guys? So today I'm going to be answering some of your questions that you guys left on YouTube, as opposed to questions in emails or stuff like that. So I'll be posting your actual question with the username. If I mispronounce the username, it's my bad. I probably will. So there's that. So the first question we have is, when you got caught, what were some things that you feared might happen due to being arrested, being barred from the internet, family and friends, opinions, jobs, etc.? What were some things that actually happened that you hadn't anticipated? And if shareable, what was your coolest or weirdest one-of-one experience on the darknet as a vendor? As far as things that I feared that might happen, there really wasn't much. I had been arrested in the past, but none of them were like really related to narcotics trafficking. So I kind of knew, the system. I hadn't been in trouble in over 10 years. The 10 years that I had spent before that, I had spent raising 3 children. So like I didn't really. I had already been, when I was younger, I'd already been to county jail. I had been to the state prison, not for a long sentence, but, I'd been there. So I knew the criminal justice system. I kind of knew how it went. I had never dealt with anything from the federal point of view. But it wasn't really something that I was freaked out about. Like the only thing that really I didn't like was not knowing how much time I was going to serve. I think that's one of the worst things for any defendant, is like you don't know how much time you're going to serve until you actually get sentenced. And I think that's probably the most stressful time, and that time that you have that unknown. As far as being barred from the internet, obviously you have, there's countermeasures for everything. So it's not, and typically like being barred from the internet, you see that more in sexual predator cases, not necessarily drug trafficking cases. I don't think I've seen a darknet vendor that was barred from the internet that I can recall. There might be one, I just don't recall it. But you do see it in sexual predator cases. That's absolutely something you see as a ruling. So going on to the next part, it was what were some things that actually happened that you hadn't anticipated? I hadn't anticipated my cousin, telling on me. That was one thing I hadn't anticipated. That was probably one of the only things that I didn't have a countermeasure or a contingency plan in place to cover or, really deal with. Maybe that was just like a form of denial, where it's like, you don't want to believe that, a family member would do that. But, that was basically if I had to say, an unanticipated event, that would be the unanticipated event, because we had discussed security prior to that. Me and her, we had talked about, what to say, what not to say. I had informed her of her rights. We had sat down, we would probably watch 5 hours of content from different lawyers and, learned a lot about just like our rights, to begin with. And, she knew not to, talk. She knew that if she talked, that would be one of the things that establishes a conspiracy charge. Her only charge was conspiracy. So when you admit to that, you just made yourself guilty. For my Frank's hearing, I would have beaten all 10 of my counts, if she hadn't said anything. And if she hadn't said anything, her only count was conspiracy. So she wouldn't have had to deal with, any type of charge either. But, the feds know what they're doing, and they're really good at scaring people who have, they've never had any experience with the system. And that's exactly what they did. So that would have to be the unanticipated thing. And then the coolest / weirdest one-of-one experience on the darknet as a vendor was probably some of the camaraderie that existed between other vendors that liked you and knew who you were. There were two particular vendors that I really got cool with. One of whom basically runs a cartel. Not on this continent, so I'm not gonna drop the name, but he is a major vendor and very he's a highly intelligent guy. I remember talking to him because we were doing business on a couple of different things, but one of the things was hashish, and I had close to and like what I'm talking about isn't something that's unknown or hidden. Like it was common knowledge even when I was doing it, who I was working with. So a little bit of research, you could figure it out. But with the guy that I was getting like my hash from, because I was having some of it imported, it was I had 15 different types of hash, and I wanted to, because I was selling moonshine, I wanted to export 55-gallon drums of that to him in exchange for his hashish. But to have that, have 200, kilos at a time of hashish come, overseas from customs, like it's hard to do that, and be on that kind of small level where like we don't have container ships and stuff. So, my big thing was like when I made moonshine, I would spend like $10 to make 1 gallon of moonshine. I could sell it for $100. So it was very profitable for me to exchange product for a product. And me and him had gotten so close that he would, he would front me this stuff. Like he'd front me keys and keys of hash, and like that was, to me, that was really incredible, because we've never met each other. We don't know each other. We don't know what each other wears. We don't know how we dress. We don't know our, religions. Like we're just judging each other based on our minds, and it's a lot like the hacking subculture in that way, where you're being judged off your intelligence. And that was something that I love. I found that probably to be the coolest experience. Probably the weirdest experience that I didn't like was I've had a couple of different people ask me if I could send products, but like put a slit in the product, like cut it. And that's so like, dogs get alerted to it. And it's basically, you're sending this to someone else to, the person that's paying for it isn't the person that's getting it. They're sending it to someone to try to screw them over, which really makes no sense at the end of the day, because that person that's getting that has plausible deniability, right? Like they could say I didn't order it, and it's not something the government can't prove that they did, right? Now with the feds, they can say whatever they want, and it'll probably stick. But again, at the end of the day, they had some kind of plausible deniability where they could say, I didn't order that. That's not mine. That was probably the experiences that I didn't like very much, because I wouldn't do it, And you had people who would offer you like a good amount of money to do it. I just think I think it's a dirty move, and I think it's kind of a cowardice move, And I didn't want to be a part of that. So, it's funny because it's like, oh, this guy, selling drugs in the dark, and you talk about morals, and yeah, I don't think that, I think that you have lines that you decide whether or not you want to cross, and those are really up to you, and for me, like just, screwing people over like that, even though like it really couldn't screw them over, it's just not something that I wanted on my conscience. So I hope that answers your questions.